Most preppers waste hundreds of dollars every single year on supplies that will never save them when it actually counts. That is not an opinion, that is a pattern. It repeats itself across every level of experience, from the person who just watched their first survival video last Tuesday to the veteran who has been building their stockpile for over a decade. The trap looks different each time, but the damage is always the same. Money gone, storage space eaten up, and a false sense of security that could get someone killed when seconds matter most. Here is what nobody in the preparedness world likes to admit. More stuff does not automatically mean more prepared. In fact, the wrong stuff can leave you in a worse position than if you had spent that money somewhere that actually matters. You can have wall-to-wall shelves packed with supplies and still be completely vulnerable when an emergency hits. The sheer volume of gear creates a feeling of readiness that simply is not there when you pull back the curtain. Think about that image for a moment. Shelves full, bags packed, drawers overflowing with tools and gadgets. And yet, when the moment arrives, none of it does what you needed it to do. That is the quiet disaster that lives inside a lot of preparedness plans right now. People feel ready. They are not ready. Those two things can coexist for years without anyone noticing, right up until the moment they cannot. Today, we are going to fix that. We are walking through 10 categories of prepping purchases that drain budgets, collect dust, and deliver almost nothing when real pressure hits. Some of these will be obvious. Some will sting a little because you've already made the mistake. All of them are worth understanding deeply before your next purchase, because money spent on the wrong things is money that could have gone towards something that would genuinely protect your household. And before we get into it, here's a question worth sitting with. What is the most wasteful thing you have ever bought in the name of preparedness? Maybe it was too much of something. Maybe it was something you genuinely thought you needed and never once touched. Maybe it looked great in a review video but fell apart the first time you actually tested it. Drop it in the comments below. That kind of honest feedback helps everyone in this community, especially people who are just starting out and trying to avoid the same expensive mistakes that more experienced people have already made. Real experience beats marketing every single time. Now, let's get into it. The first category is subscription boxes. On the surface, these feel like a great deal. A box arrives every month, it's packaged attractively, the items inside look useful and sometimes even impressive. The marketing language says the contents are worth significantly more than what you paid for the subscription, and for a moment, opening it genuinely does feel exciting, almost like a reward for taking preparedness seriously. But here's the problem that nobody talks about in the promotional material. The value equation only works if you actually use what's inside, and most subscription boxes are assembled to look impressive on paper rather than to serve your specific preparedness situation. You might get a fire starter, a compact multi-tool, a small flashlight, and 3 other items you'll never open because they don't apply to your setup, your location, or your threat assessment. If only 1 or 2 of those items are genuinely useful to you, you have not received $70 or $80 in real value. You have received $20 in practical value and paid $60 for the privilege of someone else making your decisions. Month after month, that math gets worse. Who decides what goes in the box? A marketing team, not you. Not your personal threat assessment, not your geographic situation, your household size, your storage constraints, or your skill gaps. Somebody else in a warehouse somewhere decided what goes in, and now you're paying monthly for their judgment calls about your survival plan. Could these make decent gifts for someone who is curious about preparedness? Possibly. Is it mildly interesting to try for a month or 2 to see what the format offers? Sure. But as a long-term strategy for building a serious and functional preparedness plan, subscription boxes are one of the quickest ways to accumulate impressive-looking clutter without actually building real capability. Know what you need first. Build a list based on your actual situation, then go out and buy exactly that from sources you choose at quality levels you control. The second category is water filters. But the more precise problem is buying the wrong water filter for your specific situation and then assuming the job is done. This comes up constantly when new people ask for beginner recommendations. The same 2 or 3 affordable products get mentioned in every forum, every comment section, and every beginner's guide. They are inexpensive, they are compact, they fit in a pocket or a pack, and they genuinely work well for a specific and somewhat narrow range of conditions. The issue is that specific range. Lightweight personal filters designed primarily for backcountry hiking will remove certain biological threats, specific parasites, and some bacteria that come from natural water sources in wilderness settings. What they are not engineered to handle are chemical contaminants, heavy metals, agricultural runoff, industrial pollutants, or viruses. In a rural wilderness environment where the primary contamination risk is biological and comes from wildlife or natural sources, that filter performs exactly as intended. In a suburban or urban environment where water sources may carry far more complex contamination profiles, that same filter may give you a dangerous sense of false confidence while failing to address the actual thread sitting in the water you just drank. So what is the right answer? There is no single universal one, and that is precisely the point. Your answer depends entirely on where you live, where you would realistically access water during an emergency specific to your area, and what that water is actually likely to contain. Gravity-fed countertop filtration systems handle a significantly broader category of contaminants and are worth understanding deeply if you live in an environment where water quality is complex or chemical contamination is a realistic concern. Carrying a compact personal filter absolutely makes sense as a portable backup for certain scenarios. Just do not allow one inexpensive tool to become your entire water treatment strategy when your situation demands more. Do the research before you spend the money. Ask yourself what your realistic water sources actually are in an emergency scenario local to where you live. Then match the filter to the specific threat profile of those sources, not to the price point and not to what a stranger on a forum recommended without knowing the first thing about your situation. The third category is redundancy taken so far that it stops being strategic and starts becoming a problem in its own right. There is a principle that circulates widely in preparedness communities, the idea that 2 is 1 and 1 is none. That philosophy exists for genuinely good reasons. Single points of failure are real risks in any emergency scenario, and having backups for critical systems is sound thinking. But that principle has a ceiling, and past that ceiling, the logic inverts entirely. At some point, redundancy tips over into excess, and excess creates its own category of problems. A backup is smart. A backup to the backup covers the rare situation where both fail. 15 versions of the same tool is no longer a preparedness strategy. It is a collection. Collections are great hobbies. They are not survival plans. Here is where the real danger lives. When someone focuses their energy and their budget on accumulating multiples of a single item they enjoy buying, that accumulation almost always happens at the expense of categories they have not addressed at all. You might have 11 different ways to start a fire, while your first aid setup is missing components that matter enormously. You might have more folding knives than you could ever carry, while your household water storage is nowhere near adequate for even a short-term disruption. The thing you keep buying feels like measurable progress because the numbers go up. The categories you keep skipping feel overwhelming or expensive or unclear, so they stay untouched. The gap in your actual plan grows quietly while the storage bins fill up with duplicates. A reliable basic lighter starts fires the vast majority of the time with essentially no skill required. Having several of them distributed across your kits and vehicles is genuinely practical. Understanding alternative fire starting methods and having the skill to use them is valuable knowledge worth developing. Owning 30 different variations of those tools while other fundamental categories go completely unaddressed is a misallocation of both financial resources and mental energy that will show up as a problem eventually. What categories of your preparedness plan have you been consistently avoiding or delaying? That honest answer is almost certainly where your next investment of time and money should go. The uncomfortable areas are usually the most important ones. The fourth category is pre-assembled survival kits. These are tempting because they appear to offer a legitimate shortcut. One purchase, one box, one moment of decision, and suddenly you feel covered. The marketing language leans heavily on piece count, 100 pieces, 200 pieces. The implied message is that a higher number of items equals a higher level of preparedness. It does not work that way. What actually matters is the functional quality of those pieces and whether the selection genuinely matches your real-world needs. Many pre-assembled kits are built with components chosen primarily for low unit cost because that is what allows the headline price point and the impressive-sounding piece count to coexist. In a genuinely high-stakes situation, tools that fail are not simply useless. They can be actively harmful if you were counting on them and they let you down at the moment you needed them most. There's a deeper problem here beyond the quality question. When you buy a pre-assembled kit and put it in your vehicle or on your shelf, you are essentially outsourcing your judgment about what your household needs to survive an emergency. You did not choose those components. You do not fully understand why each one is included. You have not practiced with most of them, and when the moment arrives that you actually need to access and use any of it, you are learning under pressure, in a degraded environment, possibly in the dark, possibly under physical or emotional stress. That is the absolute worst time and worst condition under which to be learning. Building your own kits takes more time. It requires more individual decisions. It means doing research on each item, understanding its purpose, practicing with it before you need it, and making a deliberate and informed choice to include it in your plan. That is exactly why it is more valuable than anything pre-packaged. The process of building the kit is itself a form of preparedness education that no box can replicate. The kit you assemble yourself is filled with items you understand, items you can deploy under pressure, and items you selected for specific reasons rooted in your actual situation. That depth of knowledge does not come in a box you order online. If a pre-made kit provides a decent organizational bag or gives you a useful structural starting point, that is fine. Strip out whatever is low quality, replace it with better components you chose deliberately, and treat the original purchase as a shell to build from, rather than a finished solution to depend on. The fifth category is bartering supplies, and this one requires genuine nuance to address correctly, because bartering supplies are not inherently a bad idea. In an extended and serious emergency scenario, informal trade systems emerge naturally. People who have things others need can negotiate for things they need in return. That is historically well documented and practically relevant to thinking about long-duration disruptions. The problem is a sequencing problem. These items become a misallocation when they are prioritized before your own household fundamentals are fully covered. Some people stock significant quantities of small liquor bottles, lighters, cigarettes, coffee, or other trade goods, while their own household water storage is nowhere near adequate, their food supply is thin and poorly rotated, and their first aid setup is missing the components that actually address serious injuries. The logic gets backwards in a way that feels logical in the moment. You cannot trade your way out of a water crisis if your household does not have water. You cannot barter for medical care after the window of intervention has already closed. Having trade goods feels like a form of wealth and leverage, and in certain scenarios it is, but that leverage only has value after your own needs are secured, not instead of securing them. There's also a security dimension to bartering supplies that does not get discussed often enough in preparedness content. In a serious community-level emergency, people notice who has resources and who does not. Advertising that you have desirable trade goods can attract exactly the wrong kind of attention at exactly the wrong time from people whose approach to resource acquisition under stress may not involve negotiation. Get your own household's foundation fully in order first. Cover your water, your food, your medical needs, your shelter capability, your communication, your power. When those fundamentals are genuinely solid and you have meaningful margin beyond what your household needs, then building a trade inventory makes sense and adds real value. Lay the foundation first, every time, without exception. The sixth category is long-term food storage products that nobody in your actual household will realistically eat. This one is subtle because it looks responsible and strategic on the surface, buying in bulk, focusing on shelf life, building a deep pantry. These are legitimate and valuable preparedness strategies when executed well. The execution is where the problem emerges. Freeze-dried meal pouches have become a significant piece of the preparedness marketing landscape. The shelf life numbers are genuinely impressive.
The packaging looks serious and purpose-built. And for households where these foods work well with the family's actual palate and preparation habits, they are a reasonable option worth considering. But if your family finds the taste or texture difficult to accept, if the preparation method requires more water than your emergency water plan can support, or if the caloric density or nutritional profile does not match your household's actual requirements, that impressive shelf life number becomes functionally irrelevant. Food that will not be eaten does not protect anyone. Buying it anyway because the marketing is compelling is not preparedness. It is expensive box collecting. The same principle applies even more broadly to bulk canned goods. Buying large quantities of foods that your household does not regularly consume and does not genuinely enjoy is one of the most common early mistakes in this space. It provides real psychological comfort in the moment. It creates a visible and tangible pile of supplies that feels like progress. But if those cans sit untouched for years, you are not rotating your supply meaningfully. You are not building familiarity with preparing those foods under normal conditions, and eventually you are spending money to dispose of supplies you never actually used. The approach that actually works is straightforward once you commit to it. Store what your household genuinely eats. Rotate what you store so that your supply is always fresh and your family is always eating from it. Buy slightly more than your normal consumption rate of the foods your household already uses regularly, and build your supply depth gradually from that base. A meaningful supply of familiar food that gets consumed and replenished in a regular cycle is worth far more in a real emergency than a storage room full of unfamiliar products nobody will touch when stress levels are high and everything feels wrong. What does your household actually eat in a normal week? Write it down. That list is your food storage plan. Start there and build outward deliberately. The seventh category is low-quality gear broadly. There's a version of cost consciousness and preparedness that makes complete and rational sense. You do not need the most expensive version of everything across every category. Premium price points do not automatically deliver premium performance. There are genuine value options in almost every area of preparedness that perform well at reasonable prices. But there is a floor below which quality stops being acceptable and starts becoming a liability. When gear is manufactured so cheaply that it cannot reliably perform its core function under the specific conditions where you would actually need it, that gear is not a bargain by any reasonable measure. It is a liability that will fail you at the worst possible moment. Consider the category of multi-function tools designed to consolidate several simpler tools into a compact package. A folding shovel with an integrated saw blade, compass, bottle opener, fire striker, and various other additions sounds impressively versatile on a product listing. But each additional moving part, each additional mechanism, each additional fold point or joint represents an additional potential failure location. A single-piece shovel made from quality material in sound construction has almost no failure points. In a real emergency situation where the ground is frozen or compacted and the stakes are genuinely high, which tool do you want in your hands? The same reasoning applies across every category. Backpacks whose strap seams give out under load, water treatment devices that cannot actually remove the contaminants they claim to address, flashlights that function for a handful of uses before the switch fails or the lens cracks. These items register as savings at the point of purchase. They register as failures at the point of need, which is precisely the moment when a failure costs you far more than the money you saved. Allocate your budget according to what you would actually depend on in your most realistic emergency scenarios. Identify the categories where reliable performance is non-negotiable given your situation. Prioritize quality there, even if it means buying less of other things in the short term. For items where performance genuinely is not critical to your safety or survival, value options are entirely appropriate. The key is knowing the difference before you make the purchase, rather than discovering it under pressure. The eighth category returns to food, specifically the trap of accumulating canned goods in quantities that cannot be realistically consumed or rotated before quality degrades. Canned food is a genuinely valuable component of any serious preparedness food plan. True shelf life frequently extends well beyond the dates printed on the label when stored in appropriate condition. And it represents one of the most accessible and familiar entry points for people who are new to building food storage. The trap lives in volume accumulated without a realistic consumption and rotation plan supporting it. Buying dozens of cases of canned goods in one purchasing session feels like a decisive and significant step forward. But if a substantial portion of those cases contain items your family rarely touches, and you have no active system for rotating stock and replacing what gets used, you do not have a food supply functioning as intended. You have a growing storage management problem that will eventually resolve itself through either forced consumption of things you do not want to eat or disposal of items that went too long without being used. The solution is active management built on honest inventory. Think about your food storage the way a well-run food service operation thinks about inventory. What does your household actually consume of each category on a weekly or monthly basis? What total supply quantity represents a meaningful target window, whether that is 30 days or 60 days or 90 days of actual consumption? What is your specific, practiced system for consistently using older product first and replacing it as purchases happen? With that framework operating, food storage becomes a living and self-sustaining system rather than a static accumulation. You maintain a meaningful and genuine supply at all times. Waste is minimal because you are eating through the supply continuously. Your family eats food they are familiar with and have prepared before, which matters considerably more than most people anticipate when stress is high and normal routines have been disrupted entirely. The ninth category is disaster-specific supplies purchased before the fundamental baseline is established. Gas masks, iodine tablets, radiation detection instruments, highly specialized personal protective equipment designed for specific threat scenarios. These things exist for real and documentable reasons. They have legitimate applications in specific and relatively narrow emergency scenarios that are worth understanding and potentially preparing for. The problem is sequencing, and the sequencing error here is particularly costly because specialized gear is often expensive. If you spend significant money on a gas mask before your household water situation is solved, you have purchased protection against one narrow threat category while remaining exposed to the broad category of threats that inadequate water storage creates. The gas mask does not fill the water gap. It adds a specialized and situation-specific capability on top of a foundation that cannot yet support it well. Think carefully about what a genuinely comprehensive baseline looks like before any specialized purchase. Clean water that your household can access, store, and purify across a realistic disruption duration. Food your family will actually eat in quantities that cover a meaningful time window, rotated actively. First aid capability that addresses real injuries, including the trauma components that stop serious bleeding and manage wounds serious enough to be life-threatening. Shelter solutions for your environment and climate. Communication tools that function when normal infrastructure is disrupted. Power generation capacity for the critical and non-negotiable needs in your household. Sanitation solutions for when municipal systems stop working. If any of those categories is incomplete, that is where the next investment belongs. Every one of those fundamentals provides meaningful protection across the vast majority of emergency scenarios you could realistically face. A solid food supply helps whether the disruption is a severe weather event, a prolonged grid failure, a supply chain crisis, a pandemic, or something that has not happened yet but fits into a recognizable pattern. Fundamentals apply broadly because fundamentals are fundamental. Once the baseline is genuinely solid, not just started but actually developed to a meaningful level, then the conversation about specialized and scenario-specific supplies becomes rational and worth having. Once the foundation is there, you can assess your specific geographic situation, your community context, your personal risk profile, and make informed decisions about what additional layers actually make sense for you. Foundation first, every single time. No exceptions and no shortcuts around it. The 10th and final category is gimmicky or unnecessarily complicated gear. This is the hardest one to stay disciplined about, because some of it is genuinely interesting and some of it is actually fun. The preparedness market understands that the people most drawn to this space are also often the people most attracted to innovation, to problem-solving tools, to clever engineering solutions. That enthusiasm is not a character flaw.
It is part of what drives genuine learning and capability development in this space. But enthusiasm without deliberate discipline is expensive, and in preparedness, it can actively crowd out more important investments. There is an entire product category built around redesigning and reinventing tools that already function well and have proven themselves across decades of real-world use. Auto-igniting fire starters that replace lighters, which already work. Multi-stage filtration devices that accomplish what simpler and more proven systems already do reliably. Tactical versions of ordinary tools loaded with additional features that add complexity, add weight, and add mechanical failure points without delivering meaningful improvements in actual performance or reliability. The irony that runs through this entire category is that the most dependable tools in genuine emergency situations are almost universally the simplest ones. A reliable lighter produces fire consistently in nearly any conditions with essentially no skill requirement and minimal practice. A quality fixed-blade knife does everything a folding knife does with one fewer mechanical failure point and significantly greater structural strength. A basic hand-crank radio keeps you informed and connected to emergency broadcasts without batteries to run down or charging infrastructure to depend on. The more moving parts and complex mechanisms a tool contains, the more there is to fail, to break, to lose, or to forget how to operate under the cognitive load of an actual emergency. This is not an argument against ever exploring new gear or trying products that interest you. Experimentation is part of how you develop genuine knowledge about what actually works in practice versus what sounds good in a review. If you try something new and it demonstrably and meaningfully improves your capability or your efficiency in ways that matter, then it earned its place. Keep it. But do not allow gear curiosity to run ahead of your core preparedness foundation, and do not let want masquerade as need when the purchase decision arrives. Before any non-essential purchase, ask yourself one honest question. Is this something I actually need based on a real gap in my preparedness plan, or is this something I want because it is interesting and I have money available? Most of the time, genuine reflection reveals it is the second one. Knowing the difference does not mean never buying the thing. It means spending with intention instead of impulse, which over time produces a preparedness plan that actually functions rather than one that looks impressive on a shelf. Now, let us tie everything together with a framework that explains both why these mistakes keep recurring and how to build a system that resists them. The 80-20 principle states that roughly 20% of inputs are responsible for roughly 80% of outcomes. Applied to preparedness, that translates into a clear, actionable, and important insight. A relatively small number of fundamentals, developed thoroughly and maintained consistently, account for the vast majority of your real and functional readiness. The remaining 80% of possible purchases, specialized gadgets, scenario-specific tools, and redundant acquisitions contribute comparatively small marginal improvements to your actual safety. That 20% looks like clean water you can reliably access, store, and purify across a realistic emergency duration. It looks like food your household genuinely eats, stored in meaningful quantities, rotated actively so nothing goes to waste, and your family stays familiar with preparing it. It looks like first aid training, real training with real practice repeated over time, backed up by quality supplies that include the trauma components most pre-made kits skip entirely. It looks like shelter capability, appropriate for your climate and your realistic scenarios. Communication tools that function when the grid is down,
power solutions for your non-negotiable household needs, sanitation options for when municipal infrastructure fails. It also looks like skills. This cannot be overstated and cannot be said often enough. Skills do not expire on a shelf. Skills do not consume storage space. Skills do not break down, get lost in a move, or become obsolete when a better product version is released. A person who has developed genuine knowledge and functional skills with basic supplies will consistently and significantly outperform a person who has an impressive and expensive collection but has never developed the competency to use it effectively. That gap is exactly where most preparedness plans fail quietly and invisibly. People accumulate supplies as a substitute for developing actual capability. The supplies create a visible and tangible signal of readiness.
The capability gap stays hidden and unaddressed until the specific moment it matters most, which is the moment there is no more time to address it. So where does this leave you right now, today, after going through this entire list? If you have been engaged with the preparedness for any meaningful length of time, at least one item on this list probably sounds uncomfortably familiar. More than one is more likely. That is not a failure or a reason for embarrassment. That is the honest shape of how learning works in this space. Every person who has been doing this seriously for a while has bought things they later recognized as mistakes. The measure of progress is not whether mistakes were made, it is what happens after you recognize them. Take a genuine inventory of what you actually have, not a casual visual pass, but a real accounting of what is present, what functional condition it is in, whether it fits your actual and specific preparedness plan, and whether you truly know how to use it under pressure. That process consistently reveals both significant gaps and significant excess at the same time. The gaps tell you clearly where your next investment belongs. The excess reveals where to redirect attention and stop spending. Stop making purchases driven primarily by anxiety about the future. Anxiety is one of the most significant drivers behind the mistakes on this list. When things feel uncertain or threatening, buying something tangible feels like an exercise of control over the situation. But purchases made from anxiety rather than from deliberate strategy tend to cluster in whatever category is currently receiving the most attention in the content you are consuming, which is rarely the category where your plan is actually weakest. Strategic purchasing requires stepping back from the immediate emotional pull and looking honestly at the whole picture of your plan. It requires identifying the weakest link and addressing that, even when it is the less exciting option. Build from the fundamentals outward, always. Start with water, move to food, address shelter, first aid, sanitation, communication, and power generation. When those categories are genuinely solid and not just initiated but actually developed to a meaningful level of depth and reliability, then you can rationally explore the more specialized territory that gets so much attention in preparedness content. That sequence is not glamorous or exciting. That is precisely why it gets skipped so frequently by so many people. Do not skip it. The foundation is the plan. And share what you know from your own experience. The question at the beginning of this was asked for a real reason. What is the most wasteful thing you have ever purchased in the name of preparedness? Comments that answer that honestly are genuinely valuable to people who are earlier in this process than you are. Real experience from real people navigating real mistakes cuts through marketing noise in ways that no product listing or sponsored review ever can. This community is stronger and more useful to everyone in it when people are honest about what has not worked, not just enthusiastic about what they wish had worked or what the manufacturer said would work. If any of this gave you something genuinely useful to think about or act on, hit the like button right now. It makes a real difference in helping more people find this kind of content. My channel exists to give you the honest and practical version of preparedness, the approach that actually builds real capability when it matters, not the approach that looks most impressive in a haul video or generates the most affiliate commissions. Know exactly what you need. Buy what you have actually decided you need. Practice with everything you buy before you need it for real. That is the complete framework. Everything outside of it is noise, and noise is expensive.